everyone, welcome back to another Ableton tutorial. Big shout out to the YouTube crew. We smashed through 1,000 subscribers this week, which may not seem like a lot in the grand scheme of things, but for me, I love that there's 1,000 of us in this little growing community, exploring musicking, exploring Abletoning, and all the interesting stuff that we can do there. Big shout out Patreon members as well, Patreon Crip members. If you missed it this week, I uploaded a free instrument, multi-sampling a mandolin and turning that into sort of a very expressive thing, and that's available to all Patreon members, including the free tier. So if you want a free Ableton instrument, you can head on over to Patreon and grab it. So, what are we going to explore today? Well, today I wanted to explore the idea of phrases, patterns that continually evolve, that have permutations of themselves, but still some kind of underlying structure that gives a sense of continuity. You can hear what's going on in the background. That's what we're going to get to today, using just two samples. But first I want to explore, it's coming back to the ideas of Steve Reich. A couple of weeks ago I made a video about Steve Reich generative phrases using MIDI effects, and the idea of patterns that have differing lengths and when laid over the top of each other give rise to a kind of a complexity. And that's what I wanted to explore today, how to do that, and what kind of interesting musical outcomes we can get from importing that into a sort of programming, minimalist, Abletoning kind of a context. So you can hear what's going on in the background. Let's just stop that. Shush. Thanks for coming. And as always, we're just going to begin by deleting those two things that were making the sound and starting from scratch. So I want to do this exploring using Ableton's Melodic Steps device. So I'm just going to drag that into a new channel. Now, Melodic Steps is a step sequencer. So in order to sort of really understand exactly how it works, a quick exploration of it together, we're going to use just a very basic sound. We're going to use an operator. We're going to just turn it off for now, and we're just going to change this sound a little bit. Let's just go for a triangle wave. And in fact, I think that's all the changing of the sound that I want to do for now. So I'm going to turn the Melodic Steps back on, but first I'm going to reset everything. I'm going to press this little X here, and you can see all of these things being reset to full values, or default values. Now when I turn on Melodic Steps, we can see these little bars moving through, and we can hear a note C coming out. We can change the scaling and the source note, the root note of what's coming out. And I'm actually going to turn the scaling to chromatic because we want, for the purposes of today, all the notes. We don't want this locked to a scale. And let's turn the output note to C2 to begin with, so we can hear what's going on a bit better. So you can hear just this annoying note happening in the background. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to halve the playback speed, because this will also help us figure out exactly what's going on. So we're going to half the playback speed. So that's now triggering once every 8th note. We can see it sending a piece of MIDI in here, and it's going. You'll notice that the transport is also playing. It doesn't that this will not play unless the transport's playing. We have options down here to make it play only when MIDI is playing. We're not going to use that today. We're just going to have it set to always playing whenever the transport is playing. Now, let's go through what's happening over here. So first of all, let's look at the transpose. Now this is where we can set the individual notes. So if I add in a little sequence here, and you can see it's playing through these notes, and it's a 3-note sequence. If I was to make this 4 notes, we can hear a little 4-note sequence playing. Everything else is, of course, set to default values. Now, what does the octave do? Well, as we can see, this octave is set to a 2-note sequence. So if I was to raise one of these octaves up, now we can hear that every second note in the sequence is being jumped up by an octave. Let's reset that to default. Length, well, let's just make the first note of this sequence so we can hear what's happening there. And we can see the blue bar going across, and when it hits the length one, we get a long note. Velocity, I think that's fairly self-explanatory. Chance. So I'm guessing this is how often a note gets triggered. So if so that's making one out of every 4 notes. In this case, the second of every 4 notes. 0 chance, which is effectively a mute. And exactly. If it's halfway, then it's playing half of the time. Now, we can randomize all of these values using these little squares over here. The 5 on the dice gives us a large randomization from where we're currently at. Ooh. Come on. And the 2 gives us a small randomization from where we are currently at. So what happens if we... let's put you up. So you can see if I start randomizing all of these things, we get sort of some kind of nonsensical situation. But coming back to this idea about Steve Reich and patterns that interact with each other. So let's make an octave, a 3-step pattern for the octave, and let's make a 4-note musical pattern. Now, if I move one of the octaves up, so you can hear this sort of 3-note octave pattern happening against this 4-note transpose pattern. And so we're getting an extra layer of permutation happening. Now, if I was to do something, let's say a 5-step thing happening with the velocity over here. And let's do something so we can really hear what it's doing. Let's make the velocity a bit more intense over here. And maybe even attach it to the cutoff filter of the frequency. So you can hear this 4-step note pattern. We can hear this 3-step octave pattern happening. And we can hear this 5-step velocity pattern. So we have these patterns phasing on top of each other. Now, this is sort of roughly where I wanted to get to with sort of understanding what's happening with this melodic steps, this step sequencer. So let's delete that and see what we can do with samples, because with samples, especially if we're slicing samples, then we can get sequences out of this. This is how we cut up a drum break. So I've prepared here already 2 samples that I was using at the start. I prepared those 2 samples because otherwise we're not going to get back to the same kind of a place, because the input is very much going to affect the output here. So let's start with the funk break and let's drop that into a simpler. Come on. Oh, new channel, please. Yeah, simpler. And going to drag the funk break in there. I've added an extra MIDI channel. We don't need that. And we're going to go for slice mode on this, and it's slicing by transient, and I'm just going to come in here and just make sure these are all really nice and tight. Yeah, we're looking good. Maybe I fast forward this bit. Oh. Okay. So I have sliced this according to transients, and as you'd expect, what happens? Let's just see if we can program in that break. So we're going to C1 is of course the first note when we slice to transients like that. There we go. And we can see the break. We don't need to program it in. Let's not worry about programming. So we can see what's happening there. So now let's bring in our step sequencer. It's in MIDI effects and melodic steps, and let's default all the values. And because it's C1, as we saw with the synthesizer, we're just getting this C1 triggered. It's like 1,000 BPM. Okay, now if I just hit this randomize here, now we're getting a 3-note pattern. Let's make it a bit longer. Let's make it an 8-note pattern. Hi there, me from the future here. I realized whilst editing I didn't really explain exactly what's happening. So when we're generating the pitches using the step sequencer, we heard different notes on the synthesizer before. Of course, when we're using a sliced break, it's playing different slices. So C1 is playing the first slice in the break, C#1 is playing the second slice in the break, D1 is playing the third slice in the break. So it's not changing the pitch of the break, it's changing which slice is being played. Hopefully that's clear. Back to it. Already it's quite nice. I'm going to actually pitch that up because I like the sound of pitched up drums. I'm going to make the octave a 3-note pattern. And C1 is the middle note here, so it's being triggered a lot. So we don't want anything below that. We want the octave to stay always above C1. So let's just move. So now we get this permutation of the pattern. It's sort of every third note is pitched up an octave, which means it's playing from later in the sample. So actually, let's make this a 16-note pattern. So we can hear how easy it is to generate patterns. If I want to try something new, I just keep hitting this dice button. Let's maybe bring that back to 4. So because we have a four-step pattern playing against a 3-step pattern, we know that it takes 12 steps for this pattern to reset itself, 4 by 3. So if I was to now introduce a velocity, and let's make the velocity a 5-step thing. And let's maybe do something like this. So now we know that it's going to take a minimum of, if we go 5 times 4, that's 20. 3 does not go into 20, so then it's going to be not 40 but 60. It's going to take 60 steps for this pattern to now reset itself. But because we're just using these 4 samples, these 4 triggering things, and because it is effectively kind of playing through, we get these constant permutations that it feels like it's constantly changing, it's constantly evolving, but there's an underlying something there. There's an underlying something. So I am going to make this 16 notes, and let's just something like this. Let's also add this velocity to the filter cutoff on here, because I think that would be... Oh! We'll get something that sounds a little bit like a sort of a dub delay. And if we want to easily be able to control that, we could bring in a velocity plugin in here and just... yeah. This would be our way of controlling how much the velocity is affecting those things. That's quite nice. Actually, you know what? Let's just have it like this for now. Okay, so now I have this sequence playing through. It's permutating, it's evolving, but there's an underlying thing to it. Let's do a little bit more. Now let's say I wanted to trigger a bass note every time the kick drum was playing. And of course, the kick drum is not playing in the same place every time, so programming that in is going to take a long time. But I'm going to use some MIDI sorting ideas in order to trigger a bass note every time the kick drum is triggered. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to group those two things, and I'm going to bring in a wavetable. And I'm just going to use this preset that I've used a few times for these sorts of things. It's called Complex Grunge Bass. There it is. Sorry. Sorry, everyone. Sorry, everyone. Before I turn that back up, I'm going to adjust one thing on here because I know I always want to adjust this. I should really save this as a preset, which is to turn down the envelope on the filter frequency. Okay, now. So at the moment, the bass is now playing this sequence that's being triggered, these MIDI notes that are being triggered out here. But I only wanted to change note every time the kick drum happens. So I know that the kick drum is C1. So if I just open this, sorry, not the velocity, I want to use the key selector, the keychain. And if I just trigger the bass to be C1 like this, now we can hear the bass triggering. Let's open these up a bit so that actually we can hear it. There we go. We can hear the bass triggering every time that C1 note is triggered, but I don't want it to just do that short thing. I want it to actually just play a sustained note. So I'm going to use, in MIDI effects, I'm going to use note length. And here I'm just going to turn on latch. Now what latch is going to do is it's going to hold the note down until a new note is triggered. And we can see that happening. And now if I also bring in a random and give it a 100% chance, and I bring in a scale, and let's go for Dorian. Let's make it a D Dorian. So now we hear that every time that kick drum is being triggered, it's sending a new trigger to the bass, which is triggering a new random note inside the D Dorian scale. So that's going to continually play, just keep doing its thing. Maybe I'll turn this down a little bit. Okay, now, what happens if I bring in some kind of musical sample into that? So let's just turn that off very quickly and listen to this. I have a Celesta sample. Sounds like that. It's quite nice. So I'm just gonna brute force this. I'm going to select this instrument rack, Command D. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to come to this new one. Don't need the bass in there anymore, and I'm literally just going to drag the Celesta sample on there and see what that sounds like. It's already quite nice. Quite nice. Okay, I want to do a little bit of sound designy stuff. I also want to have something happen to those snare drum hits in here. So let's come back here. I want to go on here. I'm going to mute the bass so I can hear what's going on right now. Yeah, so maybe not just the snare drum, but any sort of louder drum hits. And let's... Yeah, so I'm getting a bit of variation there. So now if I come in here, audio effects. So the way I kind of do these sorts of things is I do it linearly and then group it. So now I'm only going to be listening to the effect. So first of all, I want to make a situation where only the loud notes are getting through here. Yep, floor, don't want any floor. Only the loud notes are getting through. Now I'm going to bring in an echo. And I want an LFO for this. So I'm going to create some sort of glitchy type sounds happening. I'm going to turn sync off. I'm just going to give it some stereo-ness by delaying the right-hand signal a little bit. I'm going to switch this to random, make it change every beat. And I'm just going to map that to the time. A little bit more feedback. Now a little bit more cut off here. Maybe it's nice to get it a little bit. Yeah. Okay, so now I'm just going to group those things. And that's my kind of, let's call that glitchy effects, right click, dry chain. Lovely. So let's call this glitchy effects. Let's bring the bass back. Where's my bass gone? Lovely. And let's do a kind of a gated I just brought the velocity back on the Celesta sample. Let's do a kind of gated verb thing on there. So again, I'm just gonna solo this. And I'm gonna bring in a hybrid reverb. I wanted gate before that. Yeah, and again, I'm only gonna let the loud notes through. Don't want any floor, just like... Yeah, just every now and then. More decay, 100% dry wet. Let's adjust the EQ on it a little bit. Bit more decay I think we can have. And again, we're going to group these. Right click, create chain. And there we go. Constantly evolving patterns that sort of have some kind of underlying permutating thing. I would love to hear any experiments that you guys do. If you, whatever samples you try putting in, or however you explore this concept. If you're posting it on Instagram, tag me at nicholas.thayer. Would love to hear and reshare. Or you can post it in the comments here. I'd love to begin sharing more stuff and hearing what you guys are making with the sort of things I'm doing. Please post YouTube links. Post links. It's always interesting to hear what other people are doing. So, yeah, thanks for tuning in today. Hope I got somewhere close to where we started. Permutating phrases, evolving patterns, using a step sequencer and some samplers.